Everyone, my name is Sarah Avery, and I am the Executive Director of Quanta Change. Thank you so much for joining me. So today, what I want to talk about is abandonment issues. Do you feel like this is something you deal with? Maybe do you feel anxious at the thought of losing a loved one, or at the end of a relationship, at the thought of it? Whether you're a day into that relationship or maybe 20 years into it, the anxiety is the same, or maybe it's even grown. Have you either labeled yourself or been labeled as clingy or codependent? Maybe. Do you find yourself controlling or manipulating in a relationship to try and make sure it doesn't stop happening? Do you stay in an abusive relationship, or have you stayed in an abusive relationship in order to just stave off the end of it? Yeah. So, or maybe have you found that these issues that I've been bringing up have actually destroyed a relationship for you, or maybe more than one? Yeah. Or because of all of this, do you find yourself avoiding relationships altogether? You're like, I cannot deal with that. I'm not doing it. Yeah. So if so, I can totally relate to a lot of these things myself that I just talked about, and you are certainly not alone. And I have helped many, many of my clients over the last 20 years with these issues and helped them see really positive changes with them. So have you tried working on this? Maybe you've done therapy or some kind of self-help work. Has it helped? Are you feeling more self-assured? Are you feeling more secure in yourself and then in your relationships? Are you more able to be vulnerable with another person, really share who you really are, share all of how you really feel with someone? Are you more willing to take a chance on a new relationship? If so, that's great. And let me say here that I think a lot of us probably are thinking, when I'm talking about all of this, about romantic relationships, but I have seen these same issues play out with friendships and even with work situations, kind of your relationship to your workplace or relationships within a work context. So these kinds of issues can pop up all over the place. So if you've tried working on this and that work hasn't seemed to bring about any positive change, are you feeling the same? Are you even feeling worse over time? Are you feeling like you're more anxious about the end of a relationship or losing someone? Are you feeling less secure, more anxious? So if so, you are not alone, and it is not your fault that these things have not worked for you. The reason they haven't worked is that they have not been able to get the generating force for all of these issues out of the way. This generating force is something that's trapped inside of you, and it's called learned distress. And these methods have not been able to get rid of learned distress for you. So let me define what learned distress is first. So learned distress is the feeling that you absorbed very early in life that there's something wrong with you being just the way that you are. As you were absorbing this feeling that there's something wrong with you very early in life, your brain was also developing a survival mechanism alongside it that allowed you to cope with, control, manage this awful feeling that there's something wrong with you. And at the same time, that survival mechanism allowed you to fit well with the people around you, your parents, your other early caregivers, older siblings, fit well within your family and your community, your small community that you were growing up in as a child. So let me say that there are 6 basic patterns of learned distress and the survival mechanism that goes along with it. And at the end of this video, I'm going to detail what those 6 are and how you can find out for free which one of those patterns you have. For right now, what I'll say about the patterns is that some of them contain the feeling that the feeling that there's something wrong with me is going to be fixed in some way by another person or by some form of relationship with another person. In some ways, probably all 6 have some component of that. So this is a really tricky area because relationships are an area in which there is a tremendous amount of well-being also, this natural feeling at your core that you are great being yourself, that you're here to share how great you are and how good it feels to be you, to share your uniqueness. And so, like I said, it gets tricky. And, in fact, I would say that the most fundamental need we have is the feeling that we need to matter, that we need to be seen, heard, cared for in the scope of a community. And in fact, we are social creatures. We need other people. We need community. We need relationships. Here's the problem. So good, stable relationships are generated out of well-being, out of that good feeling that you do matter at your core just for being yourself. But the thing is that the opposite of that well-being, the feeling that I don't matter, is the biggest piece of learned distress that we all have stored in our sense of self from very early in life. And that is what tends to sabotage relationships. It tends to bring about relationships that feel insecure, in which we feel really anxious, in which we're playing out that abandonment anxiety that tends to prevent good relationships from happening or prevent us from feeling stable and secure and good about being ourselves in those relationships. Okay, does that sound familiar? Yeah. So this interplay with learned distress and well-being, like I said, the biggest piece of learned distress we all have is the feeling that we don't matter just for being ourselves. And so survival mechanisms do basically one of two things with that feeling that we don't matter. We need to matter. It's the most fundamental need we have. And so either the survival mechanism says, well, great, I will make myself matter. I will make relationships happen in some way in which I matter. I will make myself matter. Or another facet of mattering is safety. And so some survival mechanisms say instead of I'm going to make myself matter, it's more like I'm going to keep myself safe. What do I have to do to keep myself safe? So if you're in that keep myself safe category, you may avoid relationships altogether. You may say, I'm not going to be safe with other people. I'm not going to matter to other people, so I'm going to avoid relationships. Maybe at the slightest hint that something's going wrong in a relationship, you pop out of it. You're like, out of here. Or it really makes you feel like I can stay in this relationship, but I have to keep the other person at arm's length. I have to keep them a distance away. I can't really let them in. There's that inability to be vulnerable with someone else. So that's one way survival mechanism can play out to try and make ourselves matter or make ourselves safe. The other is trying to really make relationships happen, to try and make it at least seem like we matter. So make a certain form of relationship matter, work very hard to get into a relationship, to keep a relationship going, or at least keep the illusion of a relationship going. Does that sound familiar? And so, yeah, so all of that I just spoke about is learned distress, all of it. And, some of it you might have thought, no, that's me loving somebody and doing the work that I need to do to stay in relationship with them. But what I have seen over the last 22 years is that we very often mistake the anxiety about abandonment for love. What we think is love is, oh my gosh, I'm so into them. I love them. I want to be with them, is really the fear of losing them. And that's really about your own learned distress that you don't matter and that you're not okay just being in yourself. If that was rough to hear, I understand. It was rough the first time I realized it about myself. So if you need to pause for a second, I totally understand. But then come back and hear, because there is a way to change this. So let me get into that. So first, Why is it, if you've really worked on this, if you try to bring down this anxiety, if you've tried to bring about more ability for vulnerability in your relationships and it hasn't worked, why is that? It's something that I call the rational brain roadblock. This is the phenomenon by which, when your rational brain is operating, there is a wall of protection or resistance to change put up around your sense of self. Your sense of self is the part of your brain that stores how you feel about being yourself, good or bad. So it stores your learned distress, the feeling that there's something wrong with you. It stores your survival mechanism for dealing with learned distress, and it stores your core natural well-being. And while your rational brain is operating, you can't change it. You can't get in there. Maybe you've realized this for yourself. Maybe you've done some kind of work and you think, okay, now I understand how good it is to be me. I understand I don't need that anxiety anymore. I don't need any of that. And yet you still feel the same way. You maybe have thought, I cannot think my way out of this. Yeah, that is the evidence of the rational brain roadblock working. But the good news is that Quanta Change, this work that I've been doing for the past 22 years, was developed to get through the rational brain roadblock. And it does that by working with your brain during sleep. Sleep is for two reasons. The first is that sleep is when that wall of protection, it's when your rational brain is entirely shut down. And so that wall of protection around your sense of self is deactivated while you're asleep. The other reason that Quanta Change works with your brain during sleep is because sleep is when your sense of self, that storage bank for how you feel about being yourself, that's when your sense of self is getting recharged. And it's recharging either with the learned distress you've felt during the day you just lived or the well-being that you've just felt during the day you have just lived. So what Quanta Change does is it tells your brain, I want to recharge with my core well-being, this feeling in my core that I am great just being myself. I matter just for being myself, that life can be good, that I have everything I need. I have the capacity within myself to have a good life. And so as you recharge over and over again, as you start to recharge at night with well-being instead of learned distress, your brain peels off layers of learned distress permanently, and your core well-being expands to take the place that that learned distress was sitting. And so as you can imagine, you feel better. And in terms of what we're talking about today, this feeling that I matter just for being myself, not because I'm doing something or being some certain other way, but just for being myself, I matter. And I matter, this internal feeling at your core, is the foundation for stable, good, healthy relationships. And it is the generating force behind those kinds of relationships. So, when you unlearn this I don't matter thing, you get more and more of I matter. If you've been the type of person to really hold people off or avoid relationships altogether, you may find yourself opening up more. You may find yourself taking more chances, being more vulnerable with other people. And this is really true for everyone, but I think it's most striking for people with the sort of pattern of have to keep myself safe by keeping people out or away from me. Or if you're the kind of work hard at relationships kind of person, you can find yourself saying, hey, wait a second, I don't have to do that. I can just be. I get to just be myself and enjoy interacting with other people. You may feel more self-assured, more that you can just be yourself. You may start to realize that you are complete within yourself. You don't need someone to come fill in some capacity that you're missing. You may really feel quite complete in yourself, and that your relationships are about sharing your uniqueness and your well-being, and enjoying the other person's instead of feeling like you have to kind of grab onto somebody and hold them for dear life and call that love. Does that sound? It's good. It's really good. It feels so much better and easier. And let me say, when you really feel complete within yourself, you may, if you felt like your whole life, what I need is that romantic partner. I need that life partner, or else I'm not going to be okay. You may find yourself saying, that might be nice. That would be nice if you're not in a relationship, but I don't need it in order to survive. I'm complete within myself. So that eases up lots of pressure. And you find that you actually enjoy your own life. You're not just looking around for somebody to fix it for you. So let me give you, those are some kind of basic outlines of what this kind of change looks like, but let me give you some more specific examples. So one of my clients was this sort of clingy, codependent type. That's my type 2. I'm not casting aspersions at all. This is my type 2. I can really relate to this. She was absolutely terrified all the time that something would happen to her husband, that he would get sick, that he would die, and leave her alone. She was very much a people pleaser, if you can imagine. And, so if her husband happened to be in a bad mood, because everybody has bad moods, bad days, she would appease, she would tiptoe around him. She would anticipate his needs to try and stave off a bad mood. Can you relate to this? Does this sound familiar? Yeah, it sounds familiar to me too. And so she was unlearning layers of this learned distress, of feeling like, I don't have it within myself. I need someone else. I need him there, or else I'm not going to survive. And she started more freely expressing herself. She thought, wait a second, I don't have to tiptoe so much. I can actually just say what I think and what I know and how I feel. And if her husband was in a bad mood one day, she started to realize, hey, wait a second, that's not my fault. Because people with this type of pattern, me too, tend to think it's all our faults and feel like it's all our fault. And she started to say, wait a second, his bad mood is his stuff. I'm going to let him deal with that. I am not the person who has to leap in and fix this for him. And so she even found herself at times, if he was kind of being in a bad mood and maybe playing devil's advocate about something, she would find herself kind of pushing back. And that had been something she'd never been able to do. She really just felt like she went silent if he were in a bad mood. She just couldn't speak. So if that is something you can relate to, well-being gives you the ability to just feel secure and speak in those situations and feel like you can actually still fully express yourself, even if somebody else around you is upset about something. So that's one example of some of the things that happen for people when they unlearn this kind of learned distress. The other example I have for you is the type of person who had been her whole life this sort of really work hard at relationships, make sure they happen. And in fact, she was in a long marriage, and she spent several years in counseling about her marriage and with her husband at the time, in couples counseling, trying to strengthen and preserve their marriage. It ended in divorce. And she was not able to do that. It felt like a real tragedy to her that she was not able to do that. And after that, she had some other relationships with men. She came from a household in which there was abuse by her dad. And so, as you can imagine, that can really bring about very difficult relationships with men. And she started to find that as her learned distress rose in intensity, which happens for all of us, learned distress is always rising in intensity over time, which makes us just feel worse, makes things go worse for us. As that learned distress rose in intensity, she found herself increasingly in some sort of abusive relationships with men. One was a romantic relationship, one was in a faith community, and at one point she just had reached her breaking point. She said, no more, I cannot do this anymore. I cannot work to try and make some kind of relationship happen. I'm not doing it, especially with men. Men aren't safe for me. I'm not doing it anymore. And this was around the time that I met her and she started working through her quanta change process. So I wonder if you can relate to that. Reaching some breaking point where you say, I can't do it anymore. That thing that I've been doing to work hard to make things happen, I just can't do it anymore. That is very common. I've seen it a lot. It can be really confusing when it happens, but that happens a lot where the negative intensity of learned distress has risen so much that your survival mechanism can't really allow you to control it or overcome it any longer, and you just sort of quit. Your survival mechanism quits on you and you say no more. And so she became the person who was just avoiding all relationships with men. But she started to unlearn. And as she did, she found herself in some like business relationships with men. One was someone who worked on her house, did a lot of work on her house, and she found herself developing kind of a friendship with this person who was spending a lot of time at her house. He'd take a break and they'd sit and have coffee and chat about things. And she said, oh my gosh, I feel safe. I actually feel safe with this man in my house and being friendly with him. And so as she started to unlearn, she started to find that a good, safe, easy relationship could happen without effort on her part and in a way that really was safe for her. She also found herself in other kinds of business relationships. One was with, the only one I can remember right now, there were several, but there was one with a financial advisor. She had said, no more male financial advisors. That doesn't work for me, because her experience of men, because of her abusive background by her father, was that men aren't safe for me. And so that generated relationships with men in various forms that weren't safe for her. But as she unlearned that learned distress, as she felt more and more like I matter and I'm safe just being myself, my well-being's got my back, she found herself seeking out a financial advisor. And the one she ended up picking, who was incredibly helpful to her in a pivotal point of her life, was a man. And it was really great. And she kept finding these business relationships with men that felt safe and good and were beneficial to her, which was a total shock. And then she actually found herself thinking, maybe I might like to date. And so she actually got on dating apps and she was having conversations with men. And she said, yeah, I haven't found anyone exactly right for me yet, but I don't feel unsafe. I think there really are decent men out there, because her well-being finally was finding people for her instead of her learned distress finding people for her. So if any of that sounds beneficial, promising to you, intriguing, if you're interested in what Quanta Change might do for you, the first thing to do is to find out which of these 6 patterns of learned distress and survival mechanism you have. So they are called the idealist, the perfectionist, the optimist, the caregiver, the defeatist, and the dictator. And sometimes that one's called benevolent dictator. And the reason to find out which pattern you have is not to just examine the muck anymore. It's not to just dive back into your icky, awful patterns that maybe you've spent 10 or 20 years in therapy examining. It's not for that reason at all. It's for finding out what you're going to be peeling layers off of, layers of learned distress off. The way that you get this pattern is you're going to go to my website and fill out a free, in-depth, scientifically validated personality test. This measures your learned distress, and I'm going to graph your answers and send you a free report that details your learned distress and your survival mechanism for dealing with it, and shows you what kind of changes people typically see when they have this particular pattern of learned distress. So you're going to start to get a flavor for what kind of change you might see from Quanta Change. So I hope, if that sounds intriguing to you, that you'll go to my website. That is Quanta Change, QUANTA, change.com. And you're going to click on the free report button. So I hope that today has maybe demystified some things for you, shown you why maybe some relationship patterns have kept happening despite your very best efforts. in terms of the negative sides of things. And I hope has given you a bit of hope that if you have been experiencing any of these things that I've been talking about today, that change really is possible. Thank you so much again for joining me, and I hope you will join me again next week to hear another way in which quanta change really can help you feel good being you. Thanks so much.